Okay, so when I was playing that starter edition account last night, I realized like the regular interface for the game is really bad at explaining things that I find to be important. And when I've looked at other tutorials on YouTube and the likes, like someone will have like uh, basic beginner's guide stuff on YouTube. There's loads of stuff there that it's loads of stuff in like missing in those videos that I would like to explain to people because it just triggers me. It's like getting go over these basic shit.
Emboldened by
Fantastic. Ignore this. Don't need to worry about any of this. For some reason, my starter account has all of my add-ons enabled that I don't even use anymore, and they're all out of date, so the UI just shat itself. Okay. So I picked the human starting area because there's training dummies right here. So when I'm explaining combat stuff, it's easier to make sense of, and it's right over there. So first thing that I wanted to change, you'll see that your health bars are in the top left. Normally is the first thing I change because basically the center of the screen when you're in combat essentially is where you'll want to be. When you're targeting things, you'll be right up at them if you're melee range. Even if you're a caster, like these abilities for casters, I picked a warlock to show casting abilities. Essentially, you'll want it all in the center to show off what's going on. Like just get all the information in the center of the screen. But I think it's quite bad to have the UI information up here. Your eyes will be drawn to the top left, while your target's health is here, your health is here, and everything else that's important is going on in the middle here. It's not great. So by default, the two of them are up on the top left here. What I'll do then, you can right click on your own portrait and then move frame. You can unlock it. So then what I'll do is just drag that down here. You can have it anywhere you want, but I just think it's nice to have here. And then same with the target's frame. It's targeting me right now. That's why you can see two of the same one. But if I target a target on me, you can see you'll have your enemies on the right hand side, or say whoever you're talking to, or another player. There's quite a few other players around here. You'll see their health, their resources underneath their health. And the bottom right is their name, whatever class they are. And we have a max level druid here, my god. Showing off. But essentially you'll want them in the middle because, say if I'm in combat with these enemies, you can see exactly what's going on right in the center of your screen. And your eyes aren't drawn up to the top left here. I just think it feels better to have it that way. And it's less eye strain, I guess, in general too. Another thing about the interface that I want to show off is if you're looting stuff, the interface turns into a little bag here, and I've noticed straight away that this is going to be a problem because you want this to automatically loot things. Every enemy drops a bunch of bullshit that you don't really care about for the most part until you're max level or you find some rare items. You just want to be mindlessly picking this stuff up. You don't want to spend time like clicking through all these inventories every single time you kill something. So to change that, you go hit escape. It's your interface button. Into interface here. Then controls is the first one, so this is where we want to be, isn't it? Yeah. Turn on auto loop. So we have that ticked on. I just right click once and everything automatically gets picked up and put into the bags. So press B or you can click here, open your bags. It's just a lot simpler that way. Another thing I like to do is open the loot window at the mouse. So instead of having it on the left hand side here, just have to kill this thing to loot it. Now when I click here to loot it, you'll see it's right at where my cursor was. So it's a lot easier. And if it picks up one thing, you'll see exactly what it was. You'll see it in the chat down here, but you don't want to spend time looking at the chat when you're just killing mobs, jumping around, and spending time doing a lot of quests all at once. So let's see. I think also by default is something you'll want to change. I think I'll have to be in melee combat to show this off. So sticky targeting is something that's ticked on by default. You want to have this off, but I'm going to explain what it does because... So say I click on an enemy to start fights, right? Now you right click once, it turns into a sword on an enemy. Now you're auto attacking. If I try to move away and try to cancel combat, I'm clicking on the screen to try and untarget this enemy, but she's still trying to attack it. She still has her weapon out, and I'm still aggroed on this. You can see when your portrait has red flashing on it, that means you're still in combat. And there's certain things you won't be able to do if you're still stuck in combat. And it looks, I'm ages away from these dummies, and I'm still trying to fight them. That's because I'm still targeting it, and normally I'd have to hit escape, and now I've stopped combat. But if you go to interface, turn off that sticky targeting, right click on this enemy and she's trying to fight. Now I just click away, I'm out of combat. Because there's nothing aggro to me and I'm not aggroed on this enemy. It's a lot safer and it's just much quicker instead of hitting the escape button. You can use a combination then of your movement. Say if you're a melee character, you'll be hitting this thing and then it's like, oh, say you're killing the wrong enemy or you're not going to win. Just click away. She'll get out of combat eventually. And that's just much easier. It's just a smoother experience to transition into the next thing you wanted to do. So that's sticky targeting, make sure that's turned off. Gone through, let's see, all status text. This is on none by default, I'm fairly sure. So you have your bars on the bottom. You'll see on my target screen I have my health is the green, mana is the blue. By default, the status text in the interface is none. I like to set it to both, so you have both percentages and numbers on your bars. Then this will apply to your enemies and targets as well. You can see exactly how much health they have. It's just nice to see that in relation to when you're reading your spells in the bottom right there, when you hover over them. You can see what damage you'll be doing, and you can see how relatively strong that is compared to the health of what's around you. It's just good information to have. Another thing that really pissed me off, I didn't realize this was the default, but if you go main menu again, system, and go to sound, error speech is on by default. What this does is your character will say things. If I'm too far away from something to try and hit it in melee, maybe? No, okay. So you'll see these error messages pop up, target needs to be in front of you, or I'll try and hit something in melee range with an ability. Normally they'll say, I can't hit that, I can't attack that. Or if you run out of mana, they'll say out of mana. And it sounds helpful, but you're having that error speech pop up all the time, and you'll have the error message popping up on your screen. It really starts to get in the way. So I normally tick off error speech as well, so you can just ignore that altogether. And if you need to know if you're doing something wrong in combat, you can just look up here and say, target needs to be in front of you. Oh, I just need to turn where I am. Simple as that. The way I'm moving as well will probably appear different to how some other people play. The reason for that is my keybindings are different. So when you first start off, so main menu, keybindings. There's a bunch of different controls you can change here with all the keybinds on your keyboard and your mouse. But by default, move forward is like obviously it's W and S, but turn left and right are A and D. This is the default movement. So W, S, and A and D will move the camera like this instead of moving your character left and right, which is not great because you can just do this with the mouse. So if I'm moving around the world here and I hold down right click and I just move the camera, move my mouse, it'll move the camera. And I can do this while I'm moving as well. It's a lot simpler for movement than slowly keyboard turning like this. It's really slow and you've only one like static speed for it to move. But if you wanted to do a bunch of really quick flips of the camera and a lot more control over your own movement, it's better to use the mouse. So what I'll do then is key bindings. You bind strafe left to A and strafe right to D, and then don't use these turn left and turn right because there's no point in using them if you can just turn the camera with the mouse. And now when I hit A and D, I'm doing this strafe and movement instead. So I can strafe left and right, move the camera around like this with the mouse. It's a lot more fluid for the movement, and I don't know why that's not the default in game, and it's just pretty much the worst thing ever. Next thing is the UI itself is quite small for my liking on my display. It depends on your display, but if you go to system and hit advanced, you'll see this UI scale slider here. I'm not sure if it's ticked on or not by default, but it should be. If it's not, tick it on. And then you can just adjust this. I like to bump it up a little bit so you can see more stuff just on the screen. It's just easier to read everything. Like every single tooltip will get bigger. When you're hovering over your abilities in the bottom right, then you'll have your explanations for pretty much anything. And it applies to everything you're hovering over. You'll see on the bottom right. It's just easier to read. And when your action bars are bigger, it's nicer to know. Because if I have an ability that, say, has a cooldown, this every man for himself human ability, if I click on that to use it, you'll see it's now ticking down. It's just easier to see that cooldown coming off of cooldown, say 3 minutes time, when the action bars are bigger. That's just my personal preference, but I think it's better to have it set up that way. Another thing for the interface, eventually you'll have more abilities than will fit on one bar. So what I like to do is click on all these other bars. These are all optional, but I normally turn them all on. And then I'll have Keybindings set up for these 2 bars for stuff I want to do in combat. So you'll see Shadow Bolt on this Warlock is set to Q. So when I can just target something, instead of clicking on abilities, just target the enemy and start pressing Q over and over again. And you can just keep casting. And that'll apply to every other ability that you unlock. So you go into your spell book. All the stuff for your character and all these important panes are down the bottom right, but there's shortcuts for them as well if you hover over them. So if I press P, it goes into my spell book. You can have a read through all this stuff that applies. You can pull them down to your bars as well if you want, if they're active abilities. So say if I didn't have Shadow Bolt and every man for himself on these bars, I'd just drag. The game will tell you haven't added it to your action bars. You just drag it and bring it down to the bar. And you can put it whenever you want, but if it's the main ability that this character is going to be using, I normally put it on Q. It's personal preference, but that's the way I'll set it up. Then there's these bars that don't have buttons on them that I have set up as well. This will be for stuff that you don't use in combat and you won't need immediately all the time. But you will want to have them readily available. So it's like stuff like your Hearthstone, or when you have mounts, or a fishing rod, or stuff like that. You'll come across like food that you'll have to use outside of combat. I normally click that down here. Hearthstone will go up here on the right hand side. So instead of having to go into my bags to click the Hearthstone, it's always there on the interface. And then I can just click on it. And then I start Hearthstone. Trying to think, was there anything else I need to explain? Those are the main things that really sort of like annoyed me, because like it didn't explain other things like what happens to a character that a completely new player has when they learn a bunch of abilities that fill up one bar, and that's all you have. Like I don't know what happens, but I think it was just better to have this set up before the eventuality that does happen, because when you level up, you'll get loads of different abilities that you'll need to find space for somewhere. And that's another thing about these key bindings. So we looked at the movement keys for moving around on this pane here. If you go to action bar, these are corresponding to all the buttons I have down the left here, or down the bottom left. So action button 1 is Q. These are all personal preference for me. They'll probably be set to like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 by default for new players. I have a couple of mouse buttons I prefer to use. It's just a comfier setup. So you can just click on these and rebind them to your own liking. You can rebind these ones as well down the bottom and on the right hand side, but I don't normally fuck with that. It's just too many buttons for me to care about. And WoW isn't that fast anyway, so you don't need to worry about pressing, like 40 different buttons potentially all at once. Let's see, I think that's pretty much it. I think the difference between the melee specs, so like melee has to be in range like this to be hitting stuff, but for the casters, the likes of warlocks, mages, and druids, you can check your range of your spells. So Shadow Bolt has a 40-yard range. You will actually be able to see the range on the spell itself. If you watch on the Shadow Bolt action here, if I go further than 40 yards away while I'm still targeting this dummy, it will eventually red out. So you're out of range. Okay? That's a pretty huge fucking range. But now I can actually target this dummy with Shadow Bolt from this distance because it's 40-yard range. And normally what happens is most enemies you'll be fighting for quests at this level will be melee. So as soon as you target one, they'll start coming running towards you. So it's good practice to get into it, to be this distance away. So when they do start to target you, it's dead before it reaches you, because you've done that much damage in that space of time. So now with new movement, you can see the new targeting, and now you can press buttons at the same time as moving. You can just more efficiently play the game. It's like all these basic things, they start to culminate in, when it's not shown to the player or not explained, it's like the game's setting up its own roadblocks to be as easy and as accessible as it can be. Like, the options are there, but they just seem to be a bit more hidden than they should be. I think all those things that I've set up here should just be the default, because why would anyone in the right mind use keyboard turning like this really, really slowly on their keybinds? That's just not fun. You can see why people would probably give up on the game early on levels, because it's just not enjoyable to play unless you get it set up right, and it might take a bit of time. But once you have it down to that kind of efficiency, then it becomes really easy to just walk around and play, kill shit and do quests, and auto-loot them on your ad.